Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here at this very important event, and I'm humbled to be amongst some giants in my field. And also, I hope everyone in the audience is doing well and that your families are doing well at this time also. My name is Anindya Kundu, and I'm a sociologist and assistant professor of educational leadership at Florida International University, FIU, in Miami. Given that this is a room full of legal thinkers, I'm sure many of you are familiar with some of the laws and policies coming out of the great state of Florida at this time. That's kind of how our governor likes it, to stay in the news as a so-called education governor. But I'm not so sure how you can be called that in a good way when your state is 47th lowest in teacher pay. So I'd like to use some of my time today to recenter what's important, because I think we often get distracted from the aims, and I think a lot of that is by design. And so today I'll talk a lot about how I want to see a school system where every child belongs, and an education system where children are provided opportunity where they don't have it. So I'll start by telling a story of one of my students. Her name's Deborah. Deborah is a black female educator who is an elementary school teacher and reading coach. And when she first started her teaching career, she taught first graders at an elementary school called Broadmoor in Little River, Miami, which is a very low-income community and a Title I high school. So all students are coming from below the poverty line. And very quickly into teaching these young kids, Deborah realized how much they loved story time. So she instituted a classroom library where students would be able to take books home with them and then bring them back to exchange for another book. But very quickly, there was a problem that arose. The books were going home, and they were not coming back to school. So at this point, Deborah asks, why is this happening? And she could have gone one of two ways. First, to find a flaw or a deficit within the students, say there's something wrong with them, they're keeping things that don't belong to them, and use that as an opportunity to teach them a lesson. Or she could do what she did, which was find a flaw within the system. So she started with the most basic, obvious fact, which was that these students don't have books at home. So this was an opportunity gap that she identified, which she decided to pour into. So Deborah partnered with her school library and local libraries to get more books donated to the classroom library, and she also got her students library cards. So officially, instead of making her students feel bad about themselves, they started to feel that they were capable and worthy of more. And so Deborah used her own agency to foster the agency of her students. And in my qualitative research around the country, where I've been interviewing educators like Deborah and students who have overcome deep opportunity gaps, along with my literature review of sociology, I define agency as a person's ability to leverage resources, social or cultural, to overcome the obstacles that they face in their lives. And so, as many of my co-panelists have spoken today about, a lot of these obstacles are structural, and therefore they cannot be overcome by individual level factors alone. And so this is what separates agency from words like growth mindset, resilience, and grit. Because at the end of the day, if you don't have books at home, how much is grit going to help you? And I say that as a very loving mentee of Angela Duckworth. We have structural obstacles at every facet of the world, and so we need structural level solutions. And Deborah's story also, to me, is the power of education. Our teachers are not just simply ambassadors of content, but they are ambassadors of character and democratic values. So for the remaining time in my remarks, I'd like to talk about what Deborah did, which was flip the script. Or specifically, she revealed what was hidden about her students' situations. In education research, we have long used this concept of the hidden curriculum to mean the lessons, the values, and ideas that teachers pass on implicitly without maybe not realizing it, first coined by Philip Jackson. And in my recent work, some of my conceptual work, I'm broadening this idea of the hidden curriculum to say it's not just how that success works in schools, but that's how success largely works in society too. And by keeping the hidden curriculum hidden, the actual tools that we need for success, access to it is diminished, and therefore we have perpetuated this unequal status quo. And so I'd like to talk about how we can continue to reveal the hidden curriculum to close certain opportunity gaps that children face in their lives. So here are three areas that I think we have to focus on. These are direct opportunity gaps that can be leveraged by revealing the hidden curriculum. So the first is a relationship gap. 80% of US jobs are secured through a personal connection, whether that be through 1 or 2 degrees of separation. And so what that means is that there is a drastic social capital gap between low-income communities and wealthier communities where students may have a connection or an uncle who can get them an internship that's going to look great on their high school or college resumes. And low-income communities, as we're aware, through social forces, are often displaced by companies, and then those companies do not hire from those same low-income communities. It feels fitting to say that this is also a problem that universities often promote, maybe not UVA, but certainly my alma mater, University of Chicago, which was nestled in the south side of Chicago. And so these organizations, to me, have a relationship debt where they have to work with schools to teach students how to form relationships with one another, how, when, and why to ask for help in order to actually get it, and also how to form meaningful relationships with their peers and the adults in their lives. Secondly, we have a representation gap. We can see this in the curriculum itself. So as you may have heard, Florida recently banned the program AP African American Studies History from being allowed in our state. In 2010, Arizona had banned ethnic studies, even though ethnic studies was showing gains for our students across content areas. And so we have to ask ourselves, is the curriculum something where all students are seeing their lived experience reflected so they can see the relevance in what they're learning in their lives? Or, as the research shows, are we simply promoting a very Anglo-Saxon, European-centric notion of whose history matters? And as demographers and sociologists will tell you, by 2040, the majority white population and the minority other races population will flip. And so one way to think about that demographic change, to me, is a deadline for social cohesion. When we actually have these demographic changes, are students going to see themselves reflected in the curriculum, or are they going to see only one prioritized notion of what success looks like that they don't fit into? Representation also matters in the physical space of schools. The teaching force of public schools is drastically not nearly as diverse as the students, and this only gets worse the higher up you go in the chain into positions such as assistant principals, or district leaders. And children, you're kidding yourself if you don't think children are cognizant of these kinds of differences and internalizing what these mean for themselves. Lastly, we have a wellness gap, and the gap is primarily that we don't think about wellness at all. The pandemic was supposed to potentially provide us an opportunity to think about and center wellness in our conversation of achievement, but those schools or districts that do that are very few and far between. So now we have a system where teachers are burnt out. We have this national teacher shortage crisis. Teachers are citing overwork, overburden, lack of autonomy, and lack of value for reasons of leaving the profession. And children today are also suffering from historically low mental health indicators related to anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation, and everyone is actually suffering from increased addiction to substances, increased addiction to technology. And so I see schools as our great social institution as something that we have to uphold in order to spread wellness and close wellness gaps. And so I mentioned that the hidden curriculum is also how society works at large, and I think we can see this playing out when we think about certain value systems, or what I would say are ironies of our system. And many of my co-panelists have very eloquently talked about some of these gaps. And these are 3 areas that I believe we have to reveal the hidden curriculum and flip the script. The first is accountability. So teachers and students are the ones who are consistently tested and then rewarded or punished based on those outcomes. My question is, if a school district has a number of failing schools within it, is that district leader not also then failing? Or is that so-called education governor not failing? We have to ask ourselves, why is it that we penalize teachers for adhering to this system? Atlanta had its most expensive civil case in the teachers' cheating scandal, where some teachers were handed jail sentences whose test scores did not even matter when it came to funding. And at the same time, we're quite aware that there is blatant fraud in corporate banking or mortgage lending, and the outcomes of those practices lead to social catastrophes, but so often those people get let off the hook. We also have funding irony. As Marguerite talked about, our system of democratic control, which is highly popular amongst the population, that's because we think of it as the democratic system. But what happens is in our capitalist framework, where there are winners and losers, and those with power and privilege can concentrate their resources and take them with them, the system becomes elitist. And so we've had historical movements of white flight, white families moving to the suburbs, leaving behind desolate areas of poverty and inequality, and also the redlining of school districts, which is why we're talking a little bit about how schools today, or many districts, are as, if not more, segregated than Brown versus Board of Education. And the legal scholars, I believe, call that happening by practice, de facto, but not de jure. And so I think we need explicit legislation and mandated laws that offer us a more democratic system of funding. And lastly, the achievement irony we have is that I think we are focused on a very vague, unclear, and unproductive notion of what achievement should be. We are all social creatures, yet we prioritize this falsely meritocratic idea of what achievement looks like, winners at the expense of losers, and that zero-sum game. We have to consider the achievement of all people as something that we are all invested in, especially our children. And if we consider achievement and wellness as going hand in hand, perhaps we can consider the achievement of all students a collective pursuit that we should uphold. And so those are my remarks for today. If you enjoyed any of my comments, I recommend my book, The Power of Student Agency. And if anybody wants to keep in touch and continue the conversation, you can find me on social media at Dr. Anindya Kundu. Thank you.